Welcome to the World of Rare Disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. My name is Lisa Deck, and I'm a Rare New England Committee member and your host for today's show. Today, our show features Lacey Smith, mother and caregiver to her daughter, Savannah. Savannah is an 8-year-old girl living in Salem, Mass, who loves music, good food, and being outside. Welcome to our show, Lacey.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for
glad
coming
to
all
be
the way.
here.
Yes, thank you. I'd love for us to start and just tell us a little bit about your daughter.
So Savannah is 8 years old. She's a beautiful little girl. She's happy. She's pretty laid back, which is awesome. And we tell her constantly she's the best kid ever. But she's feisty enough to be a fighter and a warrior. So she was diagnosed with hydrocephalus shortly after her birth, and she had a brain bleed. And then she was diagnosed with a rare genetic mutation when she was she was almost 4.
Okay.
So 4 years we've had kind of this diagnosis that we're kind of navigating in the rare community.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So Savannah is 8, and she has a rare diagnosis. And we know that that is not just something that comes easily to get that diagnosis. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So when Savannah was in the NICU for 6 weeks, because of her brain bleed, she remained there longer. So she had the brain bleed. Shortly after that, she started desatting a lot, which was like a feeding problem. So when she was feeding, her oxygen levels would go really low, and it kept her in the NICU longer. And as she stayed in the NICU longer, more problems kept arising, including the brain bleed, and that resulted in her actually having hydrocephalus. And we tried to do spinal taps in the beginning to kind of keep that at bay, but she ended up getting a shunt placed when she was a month old.
Wow.
So I'm like forgetting your question. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We will go on. So she has the diagnosis, and yet you tell me that she is the best girl ever. Let's talk about her happiness and her frustrations that she faces daily.
She's pretty happy. So she's happy eating. She's happy with music. She's happy. She's happy when she's outdoors, which, there's a limit to doing that right now. She's happy in the water. She's happy in her own space. We have like a little space set up for her, and she's very content. Frustrational things, hairbrushing. Like it is the worst part of like every day for us.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, sometimes sudden noises really frustrate her, but she's really, as she's getting older, she's learning to kind of integrate some of those things.
Right, great. What has been the hardest part of her diagnosis?
So really getting diagnosis, like any of them, those have all been kind of challenging. When she was born, it was new to us to have a baby and to have a baby in the NICU, but you kind of roll with it because you don't really have any other choice in the beginning. And then the hydrocephalus, like handing her over to somebody, a neurosurgeon, to place a shunt, that was extremely challenging. But one of the things that stick out to me the most was the day that we got her visual diagnosis, which is cerebral visual impairment. And that we were told she was legally blind, and that was devastating to both of us. But you work through some of these things, and when she was diagnosed with her rare genetic mutation, the NAA10, I thought it was kind of cool because the first week we were actually told she was 1 of 2 in the world, and I was like,
wow.
Whoa, not really thinking about how hard that was for us and what that really meant. And then by the end of the week, she was 1 of 6. And then since then, it's grown. And with her exact mutation, she's 1 of 31 in the world. So
wow.
The only one in New England.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot to swallow, I'm sure. I mean,
Right.
That's a lot to take each day, and it kind of comes down probably to each day. What does today bring, and how do we handle that? And sometimes I've had a history of my own personal health challenges, and I sometimes look at it that each day builds to the next day. Each diagnosis builds to the next one. So you're more and more equipped to deal with it.
Right, you are, but then, last year when she was 7, she was diagnosed with epilepsy and an esophagus disease, which epilepsy has always been a cloud over our head. But it was a pretty rough summer trying to figure it out and trying to get her in a good place with medication and what we were willing to do as her parents. It's hard to medicate your child.
Right.
And she doesn't really have a choice in that so much, but that's why I guess I feel like each diagnosis is the hard part, because
Correct.
once we get to it, we really just move forward and navigate what she needs in her life.
Right. And it sounds, from talking to you, and we're going to get into this, but that you are doing that for her, is providing those opportunities. Let's talk about a typical day, because I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand what is in a typical day. And even when I talked to you on the phone that time, it's things that we don't necessarily think about. So I'd love for you to give us an example.
So, at 8 years old, most kids are pretty independent, but she's fully dependent on all of our care. So typically she doesn't sleep well. So for example, this morning she was up at 4. So
So you're up at 4.
Yeah, and it's really hard for me to go back to sleep if there's any part of me waking. But her dad will generally get her out of bed and take her downstairs and get her breakfast started. So I have an extra 20 to 30 minutes to kind of sleep in a little bit. But then give her breakfast. I get her dressed. I do her hair every morning. I make her mad, and then I record her button for school. She uses a switch that we record kind of how her night was, and I record notes to her teacher, and I send that part in. But Mark and Savannah leave for school around 6:45, 7 a.m. because she goes to school about an hour and a half commute each way. So while she's at school, she's receiving, all her PT, OT, speech. She has a teacher for the visually impaired. She has an orientation and mobility instructor, music therapy. So each day is a little bit different, but our weeks are hectic because, I was saying how we've had 8 additional appointments this month, consisting of minor things to major things. Like next week we have an appointment with neurosurgery and neurology, and it's just all the follow-up and the amount of specialists a child with such a rare disease has is incredible.
That's saying it lightly, for sure. Right?
Yes.
And you were saying that's on top of the appointment she already has.
Yeah, so weekly normally we take her to the Napa Center in Boston, which is like a neurological rehab therapy place for kids, and she's done really well there. And we take her to the chiropractor, and then we take her to horse therapy. So
right,
she lives a very busy life.
Right. And how has being a caregiver for you? It's probably not what you envisioned necessarily, but how does that look for you?
So definitely not what I envisioned. I always like to tell this part of me. Like, I was a nanny before. I'm a teacher for the visually impaired now because of Savannah. And before, when I was a nanny, I had choices of children I could work with, and there were boxes. It makes me feel so guilty, but there are boxes that's, would you work with a child with special needs? And I would I will not say usually, I would check no, because I had no idea what that actually entailed. And now that's my entire, my home life and my career,
Right.
So, I think that we've done, I think as a caregiver, I've been put on this path of caregiving that I didn't necessarily see as what I would want, but I actually I love it. Like, I wouldn't be who I am today without having a daughter like Savannah. So it's been an incredible journey, and I think her dad and I are both, we're both very, not to say other parents aren't accepting, but we've always had a pretty good, easier time maybe, just kind of dealing with obstacle after obstacle. So it's been it's rewarding,
Right.
to say the
Wow.
least, and
Right.
challenging.
Right. I think it seems like it's a little of both. And, the days that are very challenging, when you get through them, it's rewarding.
Yeah.
And, I can see
and
how
she's
that is.
happy. I mean, like,
And she's the best kid ever. So,
she
of
really
course.
is. She really is.
Right?
Wonderful. If at the end of the day she's happy and she's really pretty healthy considering the list of specialists she has. Like that, we just want her to know that she's loved and feel loved. Like that is my whole goal in life. Like forget all the other stuff. Like, she's a unique kid, and what I care about is like knowing that she feels loved and wanted and cherished. And
Well, it sounds like that's what she probably does feel, is what I'm looking at. So one other thing I wanted to talk about, did you go through genetic testing for her? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when she was in the NICU, they automatically decided to, well, they probably had our permission, I don't really remember, but we did the microarray, which came back with nothing. And there were just some differences about Savannah. Her eyebrows, for one, like she has a nice set of eyebrows. That always made me feel that she was just a little bit maybe different, or there was something else going on, something to keep me pursuing, what is this about my daughter that's different? Is it just the hydrocephalus? Because for the longest time I thought, she has hydrocephalus. This is why she's delayed. This is why she doesn't look at me. This is, all these things. So we kept going with genetics, following up, and we've switched to have several geneticists along the way. But when she was diagnosed through whole exome sequencing, which was a sample of blood from her father and from me and from Savannah. So it's been kind of a figure it out, and we're at the point where I appreciated our last geneticist, and I went back to one that I didn't appreciate before, but it was because I think he's going to be more of a rare advocate for our daughter, and like we had a hard time before, but you sometimes have to make those tough decisions based on what you feel, because I was going to the appointments and educating our old geneticist on what NAA10 was. So
right, yeah. Sometimes you have to build your team.
You do
with the least likely suspects, and putting it together.
And genetics is one that I've fired the most. I don't know why.
Interesting.
Just, it's been one of those things.
Right. Challenging to figure out and to navigate.
And hard, because once you do, if you have a child, Savannah's one of 31, so if you have a child with such a rare genetic disease, I think there's some frustration internally that, oh, well, if you're not going to help me figure out a little bit more about her, then I need somebody to. So that was at the point where I was. Right.
Well, that's also being an amazing advocate for your daughter. So kudos to you for that.
It's not always easy.
And
I had the conversation with our old but current geneticist of why I actually decided not to go to him and why I was back. And it was a good conversation, but it took me to be kind of brave to have it. But
right. Well, when it comes to your daughter, I'm sure that's what makes you brave.
Yep,
she's
definitely.
Brave. So
she is the bravest little girl I know.
And the best.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking about her.
Yeah,
it's
no
really,
problem. Thanks for inviting me. I love sharing her story.
Excellent. It's great. Before closing, we provide our viewers with an opportunity to share comments or ask questions from our prior shows. Rare New England in Motion is the perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. Please send us your comments or questions to info@rarenewengland.org. We will share your responses on our next show. From our last show, we received a question asking about how to follow up on a bill after a legislative hearing. This is quite relevant as Rare New England is pursuing a Rare Disease Council bill and just came from a hearing where some of us testified in support of the bill. You can learn more on our website in the Legislative Policy section, but follow-up for that bill is always critical after testifying. Thank you for your inquiry. That's our show for today. Thank you again to Lacey for being here and sharing so much about Savannah.
Thank you.
From all of us here at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, then think zebras.